Um, our dealings with the human rights community were that was in my hands. I was the connecting person in the embassy. I had many friends among the mothers, and would go not every week, but from time to time, because I would be interviewing on Thursday, so it would be hard. But I would go down to the mothers in the plaza. Also, they had special meetings at churches and things like that, and I would go there sometimes as a way of offering them protection. Because my feeling was, if I was there, and I would also get some other embassies to come. So we had a little network of people who follow the human rights, and I don't have the names, but from the British embassy, the Spanish embassy, the Italian embassy, the Swedish embassy, the French embassy, the Israeli embassy, Portuguese embassy. We always used to meet at a really run-down Portuguese restaurant in La Boca, because it was empty. No one was there at lunchtime except us and maybe the Secret Service with a microphone. So it was it was useful to exchange information. My major contact with the human rights group was with the Assemblea. And I was very close to Emilio Mignoni particularly, because he was almost full-time. Conte MacDonald, Westerkamp, and dozens of others whose names are now not on my tongue, but they had many friends there. And we spent a lot of time talking. But Emilio was always there whenever I had any questions. So a question came up, I could call Emilio, or we would have lunch maybe once a week. And even today, I adopted from him to putting my silverware, instead of on the side where it gives, I adopted from Emilio putting my silverware at the top of my plate. And it drives the waiters crazy, but I still do it today in honor of Emilio. So it's a habit I learned from him. But he was very useful, especially when I first took the job over, as you guys have been today, in terms of giving me background, teaching me as kind of a professor. And he was a real Argentine scholar, and he had a perspective and a historical view, not always 100% right, but always 100% interesting. And he was a Catholic, Peronist, true believer, very angry at the Catholic Church. And but when I would have a question, I would give it to, maybe I'd call him up, or we'd have lunch and I'd raise something at lunch. He didn't know the answer. He was a guy who would sleep 4 or 5 hours a night, and he had a typewriter which was Elite, which is a small type. You don't see it very much now. And he would type up a menu, an answer, like a memorandum on this, answering the question with very few errors. It was fabulous, because he would produce them in 8 copies on onion skin paper. And if it was a question that someone else had raised, he'd done the paper for them. So instead of getting the original, I would get maybe the 5th copy. And it was really hard to read, because by the time you have the 5th carbon, it's not clear, and the type is very small, so I was going blind. So Blanca and I were there trying to not understand it, but just trying to figure out what the letters were, because they were so smudgy. But he was an incredible leader and very influential, and was really so outraged by the murder of his daughter, and such a very effective political operator. So it was good. The mothers we kept relations with for many years. When we were in Washington, they came to see us. Abby came and visited, stayed with us. Now she stabs me in the back because I am part of the puppeteers who made all these things happen. So it's hard. The Liga, I saw the Liga from time to time, but was a little nervous about them because our fix and everybody else's fix is that they were really part of the Communist Party. And you know better than I do the very interesting relationship between the Communist Party and the military government because of the wheat sales to the Soviets and other things like this. So this was but they were very cordial, and I was very cordial, and we spoke from time to time. But I spoke with the Asamblea a number of times a week with some question or asking them if they had a report on this case or that case, and we dealt as part of we were part of the human rights organization. And I'm told by Carlos Osorio that this was very interesting, that no place else in Latin America did the embassy have this kind of hands-on, almost NGO-like approach. We were, in effect, in the embassy, by interviewing all these people, acting in the role that now is fulfilled by NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in taking the raw data and doing this. And they've not found other examples of people who have, in other embassies, who have done this. And this is very interesting. We were very open because I was interested in understanding the entire scope of the repression. So anyone could come, whether they were Argentine of Spanish or Argentine of Italian or Argentine of Israel or whatever. They were welcome to come, and we wanted their data. And we had because there were very few cases of Brian Blood is another fellow you need to see, Alejandro, when you're watching, who was in the consulate, and he handled some of the cases of Argentine Americans who disappeared. There were only less than 10. But so we had very few, where the Italian embassy had thousands and the Spanish embassy had thousands. We had very few actual citizens. But what happened is, because the major connection that we had in the United States was through the Jewish community. Because when the migration pattern occurred from what was then Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, when they started having the pogroms, in which the Tsarist troops started exploiting and doing repressive and hostile actions against the small Jewish villages in Eastern Europe, the Jews began to flee. And when they fled, there were generally three places they could go. They could go to Canada, the United States, or they could go to Argentina. All those countries were open doors to migrants coming in, particularly Europeans, and people who had skills. And so these people had skills. They were shoemakers, bakers. My parents on one side came from there, and my grandfather was a cabinet maker, a very skilled cabinet maker who made made bank counters and things like this. But those were people who were very welcome in the United States, and they also came to Argentina. And so the migration pattern, which later connected the United States to Argentina, was through the Jewish migration pattern. So you had one brother went to Canada, two sisters went to the United States, and the other brother who went to Argentina. And when they were standing on the docks in Germany, in Hamburg, all those places looked like even bets, successful countries where they could have a good living and a good life. But even though they were there, because they were brothers and sisters, they communicated, and the cousins communicated, so they stayed in touch. So when we had the beginning of the repression here, starting in 76 or a little bit before, when Jews were taken, from time to time, there would be a family connection between a Jewish cousin disappeared in Argentina, and a family who would yell in the United States. So a wonderful guy, Alejandro, you should see, Morton Rosenthal, was associated with the Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish NGO Anti-Defamation League. He was responsible for their Latin American program. He spoke excellent Spanish. So he said to me, he said formally, and he sent a letter saying that on behalf of the Jewish community, the Anti-Defamation League, there was an interest in all members of the Jewish religion in Argentina. So if anybody came in, we as diplomats can only protest or make a more formal investigation with respect to people who are American citizens, or if they were of the Jewish faith. So because of the interests of the Anti-Defamation League, we connected. The Deutsch case I did before, but that was the extreme example where the President of the United States became directly involved within days of the disappearance and probably saved Deutsch's life. I don't know what I said on the other table. When Deutsch was released, the guy who gave him back his watch and his wallet and the other things in the jail he said, "I don't know who you are." He said, "I don't know who your friends are." He said, "But you are the luckiest man in Argentina." Alejandro Deutsch told me that story. So he said it was just incredible that through that series of connections that his life, his wife, and his daughters were saved because of, who was the general in Cordoba? Menendez, because Menendez had almost no one who came out. When you went in on the left hand, you did not come out. But he is one of the few who went in Cordoba and actually came out again.
A question about the Liga, because the Liga was related to the Communist Party, and the Communist Party sent some leaders to the United States to disagree, to sustain that the human rights claims are
true. I didn't know that.
A way to manipulate these countries from the United States. Do you remember this?
I do not remember that. I do not. That's very interesting. I did not know that, because this, of course, was the period just before the invasion of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which really changed everything. And so my understanding is, and this is all second-hand or third-hand, but that the Communist Party of Argentina was on fairly good relations with the military government, because the Soviets were very strategically dependent on Argentine wheat to feed the people there, because had the United States cut off, which they did after the Afghanistan invasion, then all the American wheat stopped, and Argentina fed the Soviets, and so it was a very close connection there. You mentioned about other contacts. I had, because there was no internal politics. I mean, the only place where you could meet politicians was in La Molina, which is a coffee shop near the Cámara de Diputados, and I would go there from time to time and sit around with former members of Parliament and talk with them. But there was really not a political life that we were interfacing with.
What do you talk about in those meetings?
Mostly human rights and the terrible things that the military government was doing, all the corruption and all the. It was a session of crying that we had.
And do you remember who participated in this?
I don't remember the names, but others in the political section had more to deal, especially the political counselor Bill Holman, who's passed away a number of years ago. But they had a lot more dealings with those political guys. I was pretty busy because I was every day between 2 o'clock and maybe 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, I was interviewing people.
And did you have meetings with journalists, local journalists?
Yes, yeah. No, I had a lot of contacts with, I had some contacts with local journalists, but there was not really a lot of interest because no one wrote. The story I heard was of some journalist who wrote a story about some disappearances, and they hit him in the mouth with brass knuckles. And someone said this was the most frightening thing for the journalists, because the journalists all went to the same bar or the same restaurant, and they see this guy without his teeth. And so he'd walk around and he'd smile, and they'd see this empty space where his teeth used to be, and it would scare the crap out of all the other journalists from writing. So the government really put the fear of God in them, because they were responsible not for the censorship was not before, but it was after. So if they made a mistake, they paid a price for it. So there was, outside of Timmerman and things like that. Now Timmerman and the Timmerman family, I saw a lot of, particularly once not Timmerman, but his family and his sons are still friends. I see them in New York. But that was a very tough case, and one which had a lot of interest, again, in the Jewish community. In terms of the American interest in Argentina was driven, from my perspective, a great deal by human rights activists, both in the Congress and in the new NGO community, WOLA, Washington Office on Latin America, Amnesty International, other human rights groups, the Anti-Defamation League, and also the Jewish community was very key, because when they looked at Argentina and they heard stories about swastikas, and they looked at the Argentine military, they saw these guys in fancy uniforms with boots on, the image that stuck in their head that these are Nazis, plus the history of a lot of Nazis having settled here, there was always the feeling that somehow there must be Nazis controlling this doctrine and things like that, which is not correct. I think it's French. There were several French advisors who were here, I forget their names, but that's been recorded, who were the key advisors in terms of developing the doctrine, but not Germans. So this, from the U.S. political perspective, the Jewish community, which is very strong politically in the United States, particularly when the community was in peril. But that is in contradistinction to what was taking place here, because the Daya were as spineless as the Catholic Church in being afraid. And there are lots of stories, I don't know if they're true, that the head of the Daya, whose name I've now forgotten, but his son was captured and then released, and they made some sort of a deal to keep quiet, and there was a lot of fear in the Jewish community, and so they hunkered down, with the exception of Marshall Meyer, whose wife Naomi I will put you in touch with.
About this attitude of the Daya and also other representative of the civilian voice in Argentina. What do you remember about the opinions here about this situation? Because the general opinion is that there's not very much opposition, and the human rights activists were really isolated from the rest of the society. So, do you remember this kind of isolation?
Because I was dealing with this issue so close that my perspective was really not a good one to understand the human rights community from its relationship to the whole society of Argentina, because I was in a way part of that human rights effort in the country, and so I was very much associated with that. And you're right now that I was isolated inside the embassy because I don't think we have this on tape, but in the embassy you have all these people doing jobs. You have the military sales office here, whose job is to sell American military equipment to the Argentine military. You have the cultural affairs office, which wants to bring down. There was one case that wanted to bring down not the New York Philharmonia, which is a smaller orchestra in New York City, here for a concert. You have the agricultural attaché who wants to sell not wheat but potatoes and excess carrots and things like that at low prices to Argentina. So all these programs were cut off because of my human rights reporting, or at least they blame me. It was because of the policy. I didn't make the decisions, but I provided the picture of Argentina to Washington, which led the fight. And the United States and Argentina it's incredible. It's like a huge spider web of connections. And so you cut one, you cut another one, then you find 10 more. So, as the Human Rights Bureau was finding all these relationships between I'm talking about United States government relationships with the Argentine government, training of military officers, supply of materials, cheap potatoes, cultural affairs. I mean, it just goes on and on. Votes in the banks, all these connections, one by one they find them and they break them. And the only time the Argentines complained was over some financial vote which would have lessened put at risk the value of the Argentine money. That was the only time they really protested any of these things. And the one case, which may have been in the other tape, I don't remember, was who was the finance minister? Martinez Rios. When the Yacyretá deal was canceled, when the XM guarantee was canceled, I was told by someone who had been at the meeting, but at the cabinet meeting, they came in and they said, Martinez Rios said, "Thank God for the American human rights policy. It has saved Argentina from another white elephant industry of manufacturing big turbines that the Navy wanted to make." So he said, "This is really good," which I thought was a wonderful kind of twist. And
could you please?
And I met the head of Alice Chalmers on a cruise ship once, and we had lunch, and he talked about his experience as the corporation head, because this was a very big order. It was worth $400-500 million. It was a lot of money. Now it's big money, but then it was enormous money. This was 77. Okay, that was a hell of a lot of money then. So he talked about the things, but then they finally got the order after the Mondale agreement in Rome with Videla, but something happened and they never built the factory. So anyway, it was a...
What do you remember about the visits of Patricia Derian here in Buenos Aires?
Well, and I remember one visit in particular, and Patt Derian came down, and I was really struck at her skill because she's a very attractive woman, and she's a very feminine woman. She's not tough, and she's from the South. And the southern, if Pat sees this, she'll hate this. But anyway, from the southern aspect, there's a certain charm and civility and gentleness of voice, and she's well dressed and a pretty woman, and she would tell these guys. She said, "I hear just terrible things that are going on here, that people are being kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Now that's horrible. And and it just she'd go around the world talking to all these thugs and dictators with this kind of soft approach, because she went in and said, "You guys cut this out," some macho thing, they'll throw you out of his office. And then the guy said, "Oh no, Miss Derian, we would never do that. We butter would not melt in our mouths. We are the sweetest military guys you've ever seen. These are all false reports." Then she would continue, and little by little, she would give out the information that she had on these, about the mechanical school and all the other kinds of things. And you guys would finally realize this lady is not this sweet little babe, but she really knows a lot. And then she would put the screws on him. So it was a very, very metered diplomacy. It wasn't thumping on the table. It was, I hear terrible things and whatever. But and this may be on the other tape, I don't remember now, but one of my worst stories was during the Derian visit, and this is really crushing, that I was the bag carrier for a meeting that Derian went to with Videla, with Castro, and just the two of them went into the room, which is appropriate. I was the guy with the suitcase waiting in the room outside the president's office for them to finish. And when the meeting broke up, they came out, and I'd been with Derian to a number of other meetings, so I knew what the pitch was that she would give. And I was there holding her briefcase, literally holding her briefcase, and a very handsome, big, strapping guy came up who had all the braids under his arm because he was the military advisor to the president. And he came up, and I met him at some cocktail or something, so he came up and patted me on the back, and he said, "Harris," he said, si nosotros podemos recibir una vez más la señora Derian aquí, nosotros podemos convencerle la necesidad de hacer el curso que estamos tomando. It was like I'd been kicked in the nuts. Just terrible, because I realized that after Derian had been in with the president and had made the pitch about how this was ruining their Argentina in the world's reputation, in history, how it would bring further breaks in relationships with the United States, that it was ruinous for the Argentine military, for their tradition, all the things that she had in this whole menu of things, that he was so fixed in terms of the correctness, this view that he had, this view of the necessity of taking this doctrine of kidnapping, torture, and killing as a necessary way to fight subversion. That he was convinced, and that fight still goes on today. It hasn't been resolved in South Africa and other places where you've had these major confrontations in society, but people still believe that this was justified, and it was not wrong. So it was good. But for me, that moment was kind of the epiphany, the awakening, the light that we were really unsuccessful in terms of changing the minds of the leadership in Argentina, and it was very sad, because I saw the work that we did. That's why I'm really happy to cooperate with your work, because this, as a case study, has got to be known and understood in the future. Nunca más is really the case, and it's horrible.
You know all this about this story of dogs and hawks inside the junta and the military government, and it seems that Derian demolish this version of the story and try to show that, Videla is responsible. Videla knows what was happening. And what do you remember about this story? Because I read the reports from Chaplin, for example. Chaplin was the master of this story. No?
Yeah. Well, Chaplin was, as I mentioned before, Chaplin was the chameleon, in my view, and a very, very gifted but flawed diplomat. Just as a side note, we had an inspection. We have an inspection corps that visits every embassy every 2 or 3 years, just to check, make sure that the embassy is doing okay, no one's stealing too much money, that the morale is good, that everything is, the books balance, things like this. They send a team of 5 or 6 guys in to do an inspection. When they did an inspection of Buenos Aires, this was a time when the dollar's value was falling against the peso. And they said they had never seen an embassy in their experience, and these were old hand inspectors who'd seen a lot of embassies, where the morale inside the embassy was so bad, not because of human rights, but because of the value. The people couldn't afford to go out and have a dinner on the town, eat out, because it was so expensive in dollars. And the embassy was strictly forbidden to change money on the black market. So you had to change your money at some incredible rate, and it meant that our last meal here cost us $45, and it was a veal scallopini, and we split it in half. Jeannie and I split it in half because we couldn't afford to buy 2. So if it's good, it's big. It's Argentine portion, so it was enough. But the inspector said they'd never seen an embassy where the morale was so bad and the front office knew so little. So in a way, Chaplin was not doing what he was supposed to do. What he did was take care of the boss. And he had 2 bosses, he had Hill and Castro, and he took care of both of them, and I'm sure they both loved him because he did what they wanted. And what Chaplin had to do was a difficult job, was essentially to manage both his ego, and he says that he felt trapped. When he interviewed this other fellow, Cody, he said that his experience here with Castro was terrible because Castro wanted to be in charge, and there was no way that Chaplin could make him in charge of the policy, because things in Washington were so running so strongly in favor of cutting off relations or downgrading relations with Argentina because of the human rights abuses that I was reporting, that it was really hard. And so he tried all these things, including what you talked about, was the argument which the ambassador talked about. Now, the ambassador had no relationship with Videla, was hated both ways with Macera. The Air Force was not a player. Who was the Air Force? Lamidoso. I don't know really, but his connection was Viola, and Viola had grown up poor, and Castro had grown up poor, and so they would get together. I would think every other weekend or every weekend. Castro's wife said how nice it was because the Argentines always gave her a horse to ride. So she would go out to some ranch and she could go riding on her horse, and Castro and Viola would sit around and have some drinks and talk about how successful they had become after being such poor guys. And so he really felt that in some ways it was very helpful. For example, the Deutsch case was the success of that was not due to my efforts at lower levels with Hargendegi or whatever in the Ministry of Interior, or the Foreign Ministry is hopeless. I mean, they're just there's a post office, but because Viola, I think, got on the phone with Menendez and said, nothing, don't make sure nothing happens to this Deutsch family. And they said, we don't have anybody Deutsch. He said, don't let anything happen to this Deutsch family, punto. That was it. So, so they got a signal. It saved their lives. And that was because of the ambassador's relation with Viola. But he had no relationship with other people in the junta. It was a one-trick pony. He spent a lot of time in American business and Argentine business, and later became on the board of directors for a lot of companies here, and was quite, he loved the power, and this was, a fantasy life for the ambassador. He was living in this huge house, which is just glorious. The whole thing was incredible. It was like San Telmo. You walk down the hall. They have very wide halls upstairs, maybe as wide as this room. And in the middle of them were all these tables. And on every table was a cash register or some other collectible from the markets in San Telmo or the areas there. And the servants were polishing, so they would go down and you'd see all his collection of all the finest scales, these wonderful. Where's our scale? We have a scale someplace. These wonderful scales that you see here, these balances that they have. So he was collecting the booty here. But for Castro was not as involved. I don't think he was for or against the human rights policy. I think he was a eunuch. What he wanted to do was he wanted to be the boss. So my judgment on Castro is that Castro, as the ambassador, felt that his job was to be in control. And his major disappointment in terms of his service in Argentina is that he was not in control, that the issues were being decided ultimately by Warren Christopher, the Deputy Secretary of State in Washington, and not based on his recommendation, but based on this fight between the human rights and the traditional military view. Now, another interesting guy that you must see is Bushnell, John Bushnell, who's brilliant, really brilliant guy, who was here as a DCM, but was Todman's number 2. Todman is like Chaplin. I don't think you get a straight answer out of Todman. But but Bushnell is an intellectual's intellectual. He is a guy with an IQ 160. This guy is just incredible mind. Bushnell's view, and he went to many of these meetings with Christopher, is that Vance, Cy Vance, was the Secretary of State, and Christopher was his number 2, his deputy. They had to give to the White House some heads on a plate in the human rights area. The President of the United States had campaigned that he was going to have a policy of human rights as being the center core, or not the center core, but one of the centers of his foreign policy. What does human rights mean? It means that the relationship between a government and their people, how they treat their people, is a factor, whether it's a good relationship or a bad relationship, is a factor in the United States relationship with that other country. That's what it is. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things. And so he needed some scouts, some heads, to go to the White House that the White House could point to and said, yes, we have a human rights policy. Look what we've done for Argentina. So he was very angry and felt that there were many other countries in the world who had equal or worse human rights records than Argentina, but because there were countervailing political military or economic relationships between the United States and those other countries, they did not get the full beat, the full force of the human rights policy. But Argentina, the Kissinger had this wonderful quip, said, Argentina is a strategic country. He said, if you look at a map, you will see it is a dagger poised to strike in the heart of the Antarctic. Was the Kissinger way of saying, this is a meaningless country. What are we interested in Argentina? We compete with Argentina to sell wheat to the Russians. That's the major thing. So from a strategic standpoint, Argentina is not close to oil. It's not close to anything except the Antarctic. And the major problem is to control the trade in wheat and other agricultural products, which we also are in competition with. So you can do anything you want to Argentina. This is Bushnell's view. And so Argentina was singled out for really, he felt, unfair treatment, worse than they deserved. On the other hand, Derian, because of the mothers and the Jewish community, had and the support of key political leadership, Kennedy, Volpe on the House of Representatives, I can't remember, Berman, other leaders in the House International Affairs Committee had real congressional support against Argentina, and the fact that they were kidnapping, torturing, and killing people in a clandestine, there was no defense of this. One story that Mario del Carril tells is he was very friendly with one of the military attachés when he was in the embassy during the Alfonsine time. And this guy said that he opposed the dirty war, not because he was against killing subversives, but because as a military officer, he felt it was outrageous and should never be allowed that a non-commissioned officer would be allowed to pass a judgment of death on someone. It should only be done by an officer. So he protested the dirty war procedures, not on the basis that they were a crime against humanity, but that they were a crime against the sense of order and discipline in the military. So I think that is just, it shows you the mentality in the, and he said he became very unpopular in the I think it was the Navy, in the Navy, because of his very strident stand that only an officer could order the death of someone for subversion and not a non-commissioned officer. Whew. So this is one crazy place. I mean, but it was that craziness and just but there was no realization. What was really sad, that there was no realization of the anger against the Argentine government. Massera took a trip to Italy. I think it was in late 78, I'm not sure the date, but it's worth looking at. Because of the large number, thousands of Italians, Argentines had been killed. If not first generation, second generation. And I don't know where your antecedentes are, but this country is 60% Italian. I think that's right. 50-60%. It's the biggest group. So every place Massera traveled in Italy, there wasn't a protest, there was a riot. There was a bloody riot. I am told that when he came back and he went to the cabinet meeting, he reported to the cabinet, he said, they hate us in the world. The world hates Argentina. They did not know that. Their intelligence services, their diplomats had not told them that the world hated Argentina for what they had done to their people here in terms of the human rights abuses. So on the one hand, you have this no strategic balance, and doing really unconscionable crimes against humanity against a force in the United States of the military is the glue that we have got to maintain relationships with, because they are the only central power, because democracy doesn't work with these Latins. They're too hot-tempered and they're too divided, so we have to do that. And the long-term interests of the United States are to have relationship with these. So in that clash, it was clear that the human rights side was going to win. And it won not just for the Carter administration, because Derian, and I don't know if she talked about this, but her philosophy, and Mark Schneider and the other people in her office were really brilliant people in terms of getting human rights into the fiber of not only American diplomacy, but also in terms of world diplomacy. So today, one of the things that Argentina is now important for is changing the importance and the value given to human rights in the discourse among nations. Because when I started out as a diplomat, you could not go in and talk about the word torture. When I first heard Derian use the word torture, I caught my breath, because countries did not talk about the internal affairs inside another country and did not use the word torture. So Argentina is famous. You've given the world two words, tango and desaparecido. You have, through the actions here, have given have really made human rights part of the fabric of world diplomacy. You've changed the structure of the repayment from the international financial institutions, the IFIs, and that is a lot for a middle-sized little country of no importance. Okay.
About this successful policy of human rights diplomacy, but during the dictatorship, it seems that the Argentine government was successful in avoiding the influence of this
in the UN.
In the UN, and also in the local policy, in the local opinion, because they established this kind of opposition between the foreign intervention in local affairs and Argentine interest in defend the country from communism. And this view of the national interest and the Argentine right to defend itself, it convinced a lot of people. Do you remember that?
That was not, I was really too close. You were talking to someone who was working on the human rights account. So I did not have, I can understand and appreciate what you are saying in terms of the success. Certainly in terms of the success, what was the guy's, Martinez?
Yes, Gabriel Martinez or?
Gabriel Martinez, I think, was your representative of the Human Rights Committee. Yes. And that was, he was very successful in brokering a deal, and it established a pattern in the UN Human Rights Committee, which led to its demise. So we had a committee which was chaired by Sudan or something like that. I mean, it was just an incredible outrage that they were able to take over that committee, not by running from it, but by engaging and taking it over. So it's a very, very sophisticated and very good strategy, and maybe a failure of American diplomacy to have let them do that. But the problem is that there are a lot of countries who have, Cuba and others who have a lot of things to hide and don't want to be attacked, and so they go for the committee to control it.
Yes, and support this policy of.
In terms of the public opinion in the country, I think there was some, certainly. I always viewed it more as a repression against the press. I think that had you had a really free press outside of the Buenos Aires Herald and a little bit of La Opinion, you would have changed public opinion here. So I understand what you're saying, that this was a strategy, but I think that's more an intellectual argument. Rather, I think the real success of the government was to scare the shit out of the press. And these guys were afraid for their teeth, because this guy who wrote some reports exposing some of the disappearances, instead of killing him or disappearing him, they just hit him in the mouth with brass knuckles and knocked all his teeth out.
Do you remember the name of this journalist?
Cox will know.
Cox, okay.
Or the guys in the Herald. Nichols, have you talked to him? Who's the journalist? Nicholson? Oh, he's a great guy. You should talk to him.
I don't remember. Last question about the strategic impulses of Argentina. The other problem that Argentina represents for U.S. government, I think, is the nuclear.
Big time.
No, the nuclear development here
and the arms race with Brazil.
I think that I read somewhere, I don't remember, that Videla tried to establish some kind of exchange between the Tlatelolco treaties and human rights forgiveness.
I was not aware of that, but certainly in terms of cards that Videla had to play, the Argentine government certainly understood that the major non-proliferation interests of the United States was focused on the A and the B, okay, on Argentina and Brazil, because because I was briefed, my job that I came here to do was that job, which was the big job. Human rights, when I came, was not the big job. Oh, I tell you a lovely, I think it's in the other tape, but I'll tell it again, it's fine. When I was learning Spanish or improving my poor Spanish, which is now so oxidized that terrible, but anyway, there was a meeting, what's called a country review meeting, where you bring together all the agencies of the United States government, and you meet in a big room, and you review U.S. relationships with the country, agricultural, economic, political, military, drugs, everything, all are there, and there are papers that are done on all these subjects, and you discuss them. And I went to the one at Uruguay. Not that I was going to Uruguay, but because it was across the river, I said, I'll learn something if I go. And there's a guy there by the name of Bill Lures, Ambassador Lures, who then went on to have a very successful diplomatic career, and then for many years was the head of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It was a very big job, very lovely guy. And Lures began the meeting by saying, it is a sad day for American diplomacy when the reporting from the Methodist Church on Uruguay is more accurate than the reporting from the American Embassy. So I took away from that session, that there was a real problem in the reporting.
Why is this? Because the information about the human rights abuses, or
they hid. The ambassador wanted to have good relations with Uruguay, so it was the Castro problem was not just a problem here; it was a problem in the region. And I had been the head of the professional association, the union for all the diplomats. Not the number two, but I was the key negotiator. So I had negotiated for many hours with the management, the management side, and that person then went on to be the head of management for Latin America. So he was the one who did the hiring. So when my name came forward for a job, he went to the meeting and he said, I want Harris for Buenos Aires. Because he said, that son of a bitch will keep them honest. And he was very prophetic, because that's what happened. And I kept them honest, but at some cost to my career. But it work turned out okay, because although I could not get promoted for many years, I had a longer career than anyone else because of it, because my career, instead of being quick, and then out, was quick, long, then quick, out. So it went okay. So good story.
But going back to this exchange or trade-off between Tlatelolco and human rights.
I don't know any of the details on that, but it would seem that from the U.S. interests, this was before the human rights business came to the front. So we're talking now 76, okay? That was issue number one. As a matter of fact, that was a major issue for the CIA also, was to try to get an understanding of what the Argentine nuclear program was about. So they were doing really two things. One was looking at Argentine and Brazilian nuclear weapons and nuclear cycle development, and also looking at recruiting East Bloc to be spies for the United States.
And I remember a report, I don't know if from Chaplin or somebody else, that tell that Videla was offering to sign the
Tlatelolco.
It's not clear if he was able to sign, but he was promising to sign in some kind of way to establish a good relationship.
You must, in fairness, I was a junior. I was a middle, maybe at most. So all these big policy issues, I was not involved with. I was the guy in the embassy who met the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, and I did the human rights reports. That was. I talk here about being, in soccer terms, in football terms, the midfielder. So I was the midfielder. The human rights families who had lost their kids came to me, gave me the ball, then I passed the ball upfield to governments, my government, through our little embassy group, other governments, and to the press. So I was the midfielder. I took the ball. The real heroes were the Argentine people who with really scared, came to the embassy because they had no idea, had never been in an embassy in their life. Came to an embassy and gave me the data, and then I collected that and then moved the ball forward. So I was not involved, only tangentially in the policy issues. So I can give you. I don't want to anything I said that sounded like I knew from the top down what was going on. I deny it all. I was a midfielder. I didn't score the goals, but that was my job.
The other question is, well, maybe we don't. 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. When after this visit
Derian
visit to Buenos Aires, it seems like the Argentine military realized that they have to make a deal with U.S. government. No? They have to. Maybe another day you can tell us all these steps in the way to the visit of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. But before that, what were the objective of the human rights policy?
What were the opposites?
The objective. They imagine that they can stop the repression. They imagine that they can.
We never had. I never saw any papers that really laid that out. In other words, I never saw or never drafted a paper that had like a war-fighting objective on it, that our goals were spelled out. Certainly, I think probably in the policy discussions in Washington, Remember, I was a midfielder, not the attack. So at the policy level, I'm sure the Latin American Bureau wanted them to mitigate the wide-scale abuses, because what they had was, under their doctrine of cancer, they wanted to cut out not only the terrorists but also the surrounding flesh. And so I think if they felt that they could limit them, this is from the Latin American Bureau, if they could limit them just to go after hardcore terrorists, but leave the Christian doctrine of the poor people alone, that would be acceptable to them.
Yes, but because I asked this because I remember a memo from Robert Pastor.
Yep.
And I asked him when I was in Washington. He said that maybe if U.S. government leave Videla alone, don't bother him, it's possible that Videla become stronger and stop the hordes and initiate a process to democratization.
I never had any sense, because I never dealt with all the military service. The only military service that I dealt with was the Navy, and they didn't find me very useful. As a matter of fact, there were reports they were going to kill me, and Chaplin told Cody, he said, Chaplin said in his conversation, he said, well, our main concern with Harris was he was going to get killed. And he said, did you ever tell him that? I said, no. So, but we worried that if they killed Harris, we'd have a lot of problems. So it was the diplomatic consequences of a dead Harris that they worried about. The issue, and the head of security came to see me, and he said, on several times, but one time he came and he said, Tex, he said, the Army has come in and said the Navy is fed up with your human rights stuff, they're going to eliminate you. So you're going to see a lot of extra bodyguards and surveillance around you. We're putting on the full package. And I said, these guys travel in Ford Falcons. I'm too big to fit in the trunk of a Ford Falcon. He said, Tex, don't worry, they'll send 2 cars. So we can laugh now, but at the time it was more serious. The problems of the hard line, soft line were something that